Good evening and welcome to the University of East Anglia. Thank you for coming out this evening, and we're really pleased to welcome you to this British Academy lecture that's being delivered in partnership with the University of East Anglia. My name is Professor Sally Hardy. I work here in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, and the British Academy, as you may well know, is the UK's National Academy of the Humanities and Social Sciences. It mobilises these disciplines to understand the world and shape a brighter future. The British Academy is an independent fellowship of world-leading scholars and a funding body for research and a forum for debate that I'm hoping you will join in with us this evening. The British Academy lectures reflect the wonderfully broad breadth of these subjects and academic topics. And tonight, I'm pleased to introduce Professor Barbara Sahakian, and she is Professor of Clinical Neuropsychology in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Cambridge. She is a Fellow of the British Academy, the Academy of Medical Sciences and Clare Hall, and is one of the world's top female scientists. And I understand she's just received her CBE, so many congratulations. She's also received the Conversations Sir Paul Curran Award in 2023 and has written popular science books and is frequently interviewed on radio, newspapers, TV, and Netflix. Barbara's newest book, Brain Boost, Healthy Habits for a Happier Life, is co-authored by Dr. Christelle Langley, who is also here with us tonight, a cognitive neuroscientist at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Langley is attending this evening, and copies of the book will also be available for you when we break later for drinks. So I'm delighted to introduce Barbara to you now, who will talk for 45 minutes. There will be time at the end for you to ask questions. We have also got some online guests who may be posing questions, so my job is to try and get as many of your questions answered and dealt with as possible, whilst also including our online participants. So enjoy, get those brains in gear, and we really welcome Barbara to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here tonight, and I'm so excited to be able to talk about our new book. So I hope you enjoy the lecture, and I look forward to hearing the discussion and questions afterwards. So the aims of the talk are first to promote good brain health, and I want to make the point that brain health is every bit as important as physical health. In some ways, it's even more important. I also want to emphasize the importance of cognition, the way we think, resilience, and well-being throughout life. I want to discuss evidence-based ways to improve cognition, well-being, and mental health, and to reduce the risk of cognitive decline and dementia with aging. And finally, to consider the use of innovation and technology to improve learning, memory, and motivation in patients with mild cognitive impairment and stroke. And for those of you unfamiliar with the term mild cognitive impairment, it's actually the very earliest stages of Alzheimer's disease. Well, I had the great privilege and honor to be the neuroscience lead in the UK government Foresight project on mental capital and well-being. And the government really set that up because they wanted to enhance cognition, resilience, and well-being over the life course. And they wanted to do that so that they could promote the well-being of individuals and make them really fit and ready for the workforce as well, because they looked ahead to see in this global world that we have, globalization, how competitive you have to be in order to, make sure that your society is flourishing and doing as well as other societies. So they wanted to make sure that the individual was being looked after, but also that society was being looked after. And it also focused on biological markers for prevention and early detection of Alzheimer's disease and also of psychiatric disorders. And just as it is for physical health, if you can detect things early in terms of mental health, you can treat it more effectively and people will get better. So it's always good to have early detection methods and to be able to implement treatments really early and effectively. And mental capital really was thought to encompass both cognitive and emotional resources, and it was geared at looking at how we could be more resilient in the face of stress. Because all of us in our lives have stress from different parts. Sometimes it's within the family, sometimes it's to do with health or other issues, and sometimes it's at university or workplaces or school. So we all have to become resilient so that we can overcome stresses as they occur. So tonight I'll be discussing evidence-based ways to boost cognition and well-being. So I'll be discussing sleep, exercise, healthy nutritional eating, giving or volunteering, because it's very rewarding for the individual as well as very helpful to the person that you're giving to or the charity that you're giving to. Talk about social support systems, staying socially connected. Talking about mindfulness, staying in the moment, appreciating and enjoying that very moment that you're in and not worrying about the future or dwelling on problems that you've had in the past or feeling regrets and emotions like that. And then finally, my favorite, keep learning. So we have to learn throughout life and keep our brains active. So first we'll talk about sleep. And this is something that everybody can always, understand, because we all have bad night's sleep from time to time. And you know that the next day you just don't function the way you'd like to. So you never feel quite so energetic. You usually can't deal with as many things as you can get through during the workday or the school day or the university, whatever it happens to be. So it makes you, less positive about the world as well. So you're sometimes feeling slightly down as well when you haven't got enough sleep. So we all understand how important our sleep is. And it's strange now, but we used to think of sleep as a rather passive process. You just went to sleep, and it was a way to have your, physical body recover while you were asleep. But now we know it's really a very active process. So sleep is an important component of maintaining your normal brain function. And the brain actually reorganizes itself and recharges itself during sleep. It also removes the toxic waste byproducts, and it boosts our immune system. And then sleep is also very important for memory consolidation. So the things that we learn during the day, we consolidate in our memory when we're sleeping, and that way we can remember them the next day. So it's incredibly important for our cognitive learning and memory as well. And our recent study in Nature Aging, where we had nearly 500,000 participants, showed that 7 hours of sleep was optimal for cognition, mental health, and well-being in middle-aged to older adults. And you can see that in the slide here. You can see that cognitive performance, measured by different forms of memory tests, is actually best when you've had 7 hours of sleep. And then we can also see that our mood, our symptoms of anxiety and depression are reduced if you have 7 hours of sleep. So we're at our best with that 7 hours of sleep. And, this is on average. So obviously for some people it'll be a bit more, a bit less, but in general 7 hours is really the top number to get. And in a subset of those participants, we were able to look at their neuroimaging, their brain imaging, and that showed that insufficient or excessive sleep duration was associated with smaller brain volumes and areas and thickness. So it's incredibly important for your brain health as well. Now, exercise. Exercise is one of my favorites too, because it's what I call an all-rounder. It boosts your cognition, it boosts your mood, and it boosts your physical health. So by doing one thing, you can get improvements in all those areas. And in this study that you can see over here, unfortunately I don't have, it's on the left, you can see that you get improvements in both executive function and memory with exercise. And the more exercise, the more the improvements in your memory scores or your executive function. For those of you unfamiliar, we all sort of know what memory means because we use it all the time, but for those of you unfamiliar with the term executive function, it's a higher cognitive functions that we have, usually subserved by the front part of our brains. You know, it usually involves a neural network, which includes the front part of our brain. And it's for planning, problem solving, the sorts of things that humans have to do on a day-to-day basis. So these higher level processes. And these will, both these and memory will improve with exercise. And fitness training is great. It enhances cognition in older people, so it's really good to always exercise throughout your whole life. And it reduces your chance of death. So, you know, it reduces the risk of dying. So exercise is great from that point of view too. Now, it's been shown that exercise leads to greater plasticity. So if you allow rats to run in a wheel, which they like to do, they exercise, you can actually see that markers of neurogenesis are seen. So you, if they run, these markers are nearly doubled within 28 days. And neurogenesis is brain cells, new brain cells. So that's been shown. And healthy nutritional eating is very important for us because nutrition can substantially influence the development and health of brain structure and function. So it provides the proper building blocks for the brain to create and maintain neural connections, which are crucial for improved cognition and academic performance. Evidence has also shown that long-term lack of nutrients can lead to structural and functional damage to the brain, while a good quality diet is related to larger brain volume. And therefore, at all ages, we need to remember to eat a good, well-balanced diet, including fruits, vegetables, and cereal. And two very good diets are the Mediterranean diet, which does include a lot of these fruits and vegetables and cereals, and also the Mind diet. And the Mind diet is a little bit stricter, and it was really developed for helping people with conditions to improve their diet and improve their mind, and also improve their cardiovascular system. But it's a little bit stricter, so it may be more difficult for people to stay on. But the Mediterranean diet is very pleasant, as most people know. It includes a lot of fish and things like that, so it's a very tasty diet, and I think most people can stick with that. And then importantly, if you have a healthy nutritional eating, you can maintain your body mass index within an optimal range, which would be about 18.5 to 24.9. Now, the body mass index, or the BMI, is calculated by dividing an adult's weight in kilograms by their height in meters square. And it's really important to check on that from time to time just to make sure, because as you know, unfortunately, obesity is becoming a bigger problem, and more people are becoming obese, which is very unhealthy. So it's good to just keep an eye on things like that, especially as metabolism may change as you get older. So in our study of 19,000 participants from the UK Biobank, we showed that higher intakes of cereal and lower caffeine diets were associated with increased volumes of brain gray matter and improved cognition. And you can see that in these graphs here. So you get better cognitive performance with more cereal intake across a whole range of tests, including memory and ones that have to do with switching, and so it's really good across a whole range of cognitive tests. You can see that if you have a high cereal intake, you do better on these tests. On the other hand, you do worse if you have a very high caffeine intake, coffee intake. So you can see that across the same tests, performance drops if you're drinking a lot of coffee. So thinking about healthy and nutritional eating, it's important to stay hydrated, and I think now people are drinking more water and keeping hydrated. Should eat less salt, cut down on saturated fat and sugar. As I said, eat lots of fruit, vegetables, and cereal, and more fish. Reduce the caffeine. And, obesity, as I said, is very unhealthy and is associated with increased risk of cognitive decline with aging, coronary heart disease, stroke, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. Now, some years ago, you barely saw type 2 diabetes in children, but unfortunately now it's on the increase because children are becoming obese. And so it's very important that we ensure that all children have a good nutritional diet and a healthy one. I talked about our study with high cereal intake and low caffeine diets, and this was also associated with a better body mass index. So not only was it good for your brain, good for your cognition, but it's also good for your physical health. Now, connecting with others, it's really important to have good social support systems. If you're feeling stressed, if something bad has happened to you, if you've had a bereavement, it's really important to be able to know that you have somebody you can discuss things with, people who will empathize with you, will talk to you, will make you feel better, will do things to improve the situation for you. And that's incredibly important to have. Unfortunately, social isolation and loneliness are prevalent across all ages, genders, and cultures. And both were made much worse by the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns. It's very striking that the World Health Organization reported that 1 in 4 older people are socially isolated, and 5 to 15% of adolescents feel lonely. Now, when you think about it, why should these adolescents feel lonely? They're at school. They should be around a lot of other peers, children their same age. They should have social contacts. What is causing the loneliness? Is it that people are using, technology too much, not enough face-to-face contacts, or they're not interacting in the same way to build up these social networks that they could? So it's very important that we look out for these young people so that they end up with good social support networks and don't feel lonely. In our recent study, we showed that there were negative effects of COVID-19 isolation on emotional cognition, but the effect was smaller in those who stayed connected with others during lockdown. And emotional cognition has to do with being able to read somebody, so you can read their face and tell whether they're happy and enjoying themselves or whether they're feeling sad, or you can sometimes get from their body language how they're feeling. And it's part of what we call theory of mind, emotional cognition, understanding what the other person is thinking, not just what you're thinking, but being able to understand what the other person is thinking. And this often comes into play when we think about the service industry. So people who are serving people in different contexts, say at restaurants or whatever, you have to be able to understand how to give good service, how to interact with the other person in a way that they find pleasant, because you're trying to enhance their experience that they're having. Now, we found that, unfortunately, there were negative effects of COVID-19 isolation on emotional cognition, but the effect was small in those who managed to stay connected with others during lockdown. And developing social connections and alleviating loneliness is also associated with decreased risk of mortality. as well as a decreased risk of a range of illnesses. Social interaction is associated with positive feelings and increased activation in the brain's reward system. So when we talk to each other, we smile at each other, we actually get this increased activation in the brain reward system, suggesting the dopamine is active in the brain as well. So it's important to keep up with family and friends, but also to expand your horizons and make new connections. And in one of our recent studies, we showed that children and adolescents, if they have 5 close friends, it was optimal for their brain structure, their cognition, and their mental health. And 5 seemed to be a really ideal number because we don't really know why, if they had fewer or if they had more, it wasn't as good. But what we suspected was if they had fewer and one of them or 2 of them weren't available, then they didn't really have many people they could chat with or do things with. And if there were more, they probably weren't close friends. So it's important that you have, these 5 close friends. So we need to connect with others, and our recent study in neurology indicated that social isolation is associated with brain changes, poorer memory, and other forms of cognition, and increased risk of dementia in older adults. And indeed, social isolation was linked to a 26% increased risk of dementia in older adults. So that's how important it is as you get older to make sure that you still have a good social support network. And our study also showed that the negative impact of loneliness is mainly due to depression. And in this figure, you can see that social isolation related decreases in gray brain matter volumes were associated with poorer cognitive performance. So you can see performance goes down related to the reduced gray matter volume. So giving. Well, the great thing about giving and volunteering is it's not only great for the people that you're giving to and the charities that you're working for and so forth, but it's also good for yourself. It's been shown that volunteering gives people a sense of meaning. When they've done surveys, they find that their sense of meaning in life improves if they're volunteering. It promotes happiness, health, and well-being. And older adults who volunteer regularly also have greater life satisfaction and reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety. So in short, making other people happy is a great way to also make yourself happy. Kindness, altruism, and empathy can affect the brain. And one study showed that making a charitable donation activated the brain's reward system in a similar way to if you actually got money yourself. So you can actually put somebody in a brain scanner and show them on the screen that they can donate to their favorite charity. And then what you see is that donating to this charity actually recruits the ventral striatum network, the VTA ventral striatum network, which is involved in receiving money. That's the network that activates when you receive money. And the subgenual area involved in social attachment and affiliative reward mechanisms. So mindfulness, focusing on the present and taking notice. Sometimes we're so busy we don't think about the events that are happening now. But to get full enjoyment out of a situation, you have to really be in the moment. And also when you take walks, for instance, if you're dwelling on problems that you have, or if you're looking at your phone constantly and you don't notice what's around you, maybe there's some beautiful flowers, or maybe there's a very interesting painting or a mural painted on a wall or something. You don't notice this if you're too busy and not in the moment, if you're worrying about the future or dwelling on some mistake you made in the past. So stay in the focus on the present and try to get pleasure out of things around you at the moment. Structured meditation and mindfulness training have been shown to improve emotional regulation, to reduce stress and anxiety and depression, and to help prevent substance abuse. And all these things were increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to short-term psychological benefits, recent reviews also indicated that both structural and functional brain changes in regular practitioners of mindfulness and meditation training are seen. And our study on mindfulness practice during the COVID-19 pandemic showed that the training was associated with lower scores of depression and anxiety. So the more you actually trained and practiced the mindfulness, the lower scores you had in terms of your depression and anxiety symptoms during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's a great way to deal with stress. Learning new things. Now, this is one of my favorites. I'm lucky enough to be in a job where I have to learn something new every day, and that keeps the brain active. It's a great thing to do. And the brain changes during critical periods of development, but it's also a lifelong process. So learning new skills can modify both brain function and underlying brain structures. For example, even juggling has been shown to increase white matter, that's tissue composed of the nerve fibers, structures in the brain associated with visual motor performance. And musicians have been shown to increase gray matter in the parts of the brain that process auditory information. Learning a new language also changes the structure of the human brain. So all these things that you do actually have an influence on the brain. And the main thing is to challenge the brain, to make sure it's something new that you're, or that you're doing the same thing at a higher level of difficulty, because it's actually that challenging of the brain that is good for the plasticity and brain development and keeping your brain functioning as best as possible for as long as possible. And a large review of literature suggested that mentally stimulating leisure activities increase brain reserve, which can instill resilience and help protect against cognitive decline in older adults, be it chess or cognitive games. So the idea is this concept of cognitive reserve, and that cognitive reserve, if you can build it up, will help you in times of, if you have, for instance, if you develop Alzheimer's disease, you'll have a better outcome than other people do, and you'll stay better for longer. Or if you have some other kind of problem like a traumatic brain injury, you're less likely to end up with depression, which is quite a common occurrence after traumatic brain injury, if you have a high level of cognitive reserve. Reading books that you enjoy in early childhood has been shown to have long-lasting benefits for brain health, cognition, and academic achievement. So this is something that we found that was really remarkable, because in our study, we looked at children who had read early in childhood, but we studied them in adolescence. And we found that those adolescents who had read early in childhood had better brain structure, they had better mental health, they had better well-being, they had better cognition and better academic performance. They slept better, they had less problems of attentional nature, and they spent less screen time. So it's a very simple way to improve the outcomes for adolescents, is just to have them start reading early in childhood, and they accrue all these benefits later on. And for those of you who want to start a book club or want to start reading with others, then the Queen's Reading Room is a great way to do that. So like exercise, learning generates new brain cells, neurogenesis, and you can see that here. After spatial learning, you can see the development of these new brain cells. So use it or lose it. And some years ago, I wrote a paper for the British Medical Journal with Martin Orell, and it was really on the importance of keeping your brain active, driving those neural circuits in the brain to keep them functioning as best as possible for as long as possible. And cognitive training is one way that we can do this. increased brain activity is seen after training of working memory. So in this study by Turco Klingberg and his group, they trained for 14 hours over 5 weeks, and that was associated with increased brain activity on a working memory task. And also changes in dopamine receptor binding potential in the same areas, as you can see in this picture of the brain here. Also, there's a very famous study by Eleanor Maguire and colleagues, where she actually studied taxi drivers who drove the black cabs, where you have to have the knowledge. You have to understand all these locations of places in space and remember where they are, so that if somebody says, I want to go to this building or that street or whatever, you know exactly where these places and these buildings are. And what she showed was that the size of the posterior hippocampus actually increases with the time spent as a taxi driver. So that spatial learning actually increased the hippocampus. And we know that the hippocampus is a critical area of the brain for learning and memory. And actually, it's very important also in Alzheimer's disease, because the entorhinal cortex and the hippocampus are two of the first areas in the brain to show the neuropathological changes, the plaques and tangles in Alzheimer's disease. So it's really important, if you can drive that circuitry, keep it active, then it will stay functioning better for longer. Well, I'm co-inventor with Trevor Robbins of the CANTAB tests, and this is the way we assess different forms of cognition, including learning and memory. And these run on an iPad, so they're easy to deliver. They just use a touch-sensitive screen. And we can measure all different forms of cognition, from attention and concentration, which we have to do in things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or we do if we're just wondering about whether a drug might improve concentration and attention. And then there's executive function, which I talked about. So here's the planning and problem-solving type tasks, or the risky decision-making tasks. And some of you may have seen the Paul Merson Netflix, which is about Paul Merson and football, gambling, and me. And that was, we actually did do this test with Paul Merson in that Netflix, so you can see it there. But there's also tests of working memory, which is a very important kind of memory that we use when we're putting together, say, a talk like this, or other things where we bring things into our working space, and then when we don't need them anymore, we get rid of them. And episodic memory, incredibly important form of memory, the first type of memory to deteriorate in Alzheimer's disease. So what is episodic memory? Well, it's so important because it's our everyday memory. So when you want to remember where you parked your car in a multi-story car park, or you're trying to remember where did I leave my keys of the mobile phone when you're just about to go out, that's episodic memory. So I'll show you our test of episodic memory just so you can get a flavor for what it's like. And what happens in this test is that 6 boxes come on the screen, and they each open up to show you what's inside. And here you can see that there's this pattern inside that box, and I tell you, I want you to remember where that is. Now I want you to remember where that is, and that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. Now, if you can't remember them in one go, so what happens is it comes up here, and you'll remember it was in that top box over on the left-hand side. You just touch it to show that you remembered where it went. If you can't remember them the first go, you get other tries till you do remember them. And it starts off very easy. So it starts off with only about 3 different patterns and boxes, and then it gets harder and harder. So there's this one, which is 6, but there's also one at 8 boxes. And when you do this task, as I said, the hippocampus is incredibly important for episodic memory. You could see that the hippocampus is activated. So if you lie in a scanner and you do this task, you get activation of the hippocampus. And you can see that in control subjects that they don't really have to activate very much when there's only 4 patterns. But when there's 6, the hippocampus activates very high, and then when they get to 8, it stays up there. For patients with mild cognitive impairment, the very early stages of Alzheimer's disease, they activate maximally when there's 4 items in the boxes. And then when it gets to 6 and 8, they find it difficult to do the task, so they don't activate so much. Now, poor performance on that task is associated with the level of dementia, so the severity of dementia as rated by clinical rating scales. And it's also associated with one of the neuropathological measures, tau, in the cerebral spinal fluid of patients with mild cognitive impairment. So I want very much to improve learning and memory for people in general, but also for people with mild cognitive impairment. And so I brought a games developer into my laboratory, and we worked on how to develop a game that would be fun and interesting so people would do it, because it's no good producing something that isn't fun and people don't want to do. So I figured everybody's playing mobile phones games, so why not make a game that people will improve their memory and learning? That would be even better. So we developed these tests, these games, and we made sure they were fun, attention-grabbing, motivating, and easy to understand. And we also titrated them in difficulty. So they were individually titrated. So you saw the levels of difficulty, the 4, 6, and 8. So it was like if you were doing well, you'd move ahead to a more difficult level, because as I said, you want to keep challenging yourself. But if you were having trouble, it would come down a bit so that you wouldn't lose motivation. And then when you got better, it would move up again. So it was individualized like that. And we developed 2 of these learning and memory games. One was called Wizard, and based on a Harry Potter theme, where you had to battle against another wizard. And if you could remember the runes in different chests, then you would get special potions or special things that you could attack the other wizard with, so you would win. And as you won, you could move ahead on the platform. So it was really fun. And then sometimes if you were doing really well, you would have a whole lot of old gold coins dropped on you. So it was very exciting. And then we had a slightly easier version for older people with mild cognitive impairment, but I'll show you the other version that we used with patients who had stroke. And also we use it at it's very good for healthy people, too, just to improve your learning and memory. Called Wizard. So I think you can see that's quite entertaining. When we take it to science festivals, the kids love it and adolescents love it, and they queue up, and it's hard to get the iPads and things off of them or their phones, you know, so it's quite difficult. But here you can see the data for people with mild cognitive impairment, the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. If they play this for 8 hours over 4 weeks, they have improved memory scores. And importantly, they enjoy it through the whole time that they play it, and they feel quite motivated. So it's a great way to get people learning and remembering things. And as I said, we've also used this with stroke patients, and it's been very successful. So we were able to technology transfer this through Cambridge Enterprise to the games company Peak, and now it's also with PopReach Games. So it's available on different mobile phones and things like that. So it's a way that to illustrate how some of the things that university students can do or people within universities can do to help people improve their cognition in a fun way and get it out there so that other people can use it. So you heard that Christelle Langley's here, which is great, and she and I often write for the conversation. We like to make sure that the findings that we have from our studies actually get to people around the world, and this is one way that we can do that, and it's been great from that point of view. So I encourage everybody to write for the conversation or to get engaged in writing more generally for the public, because I think it's a shame if you've got great results and important findings, but you don't let people know about them. So in conclusion, while many people monitor and improve their physical health using mobile devices and wearable technology, they rarely consider improving and monitoring their brain health and well-being. Our recent study showed that having a favorable lifestyle, including factors of sleep, diet, and social connection, was associated with a significantly reduced risk of depression. In fact, you were 57% less likely to get depressed if you, maintained a healthy lifestyle. So it's a really big reduction in risk. As I said, it's important to keep our minds active throughout life, to actively work on our cognition and well-being. Having a healthy lifestyle will help reduce the risk of cognitive decline and dementia with aging. Technology, including apps on iPads and mobile phones, can be used to assess cognition, as I showed you with CanTab, and also for cognitive training, as I showed you with the brain training games, the Wizard and the Game Show. And these also improve motivation, so you get people really enjoying themselves. And actually, when we use the Wizard with patients with schizophrenia, we found that it actually empowered them to go on and do other things. So they got better in their activities of daily life from having improved in this. So it does extend beyond just the game itself into the real world, so to speak. And education in schools on brain health, resilience, and well-being should form part of the curriculum. And this hopefully would ensure that everyone can achieve good brain health throughout life. So I just want to finish by thanking my collaborators, and especially Professor Yun-Fong Fong at Fudan University and others that we were within the University of Cambridge and elsewhere. And in particular, Dr. Christelle Langley, who's here, and my co-author for the book Brain Boost. So I'm looking forward to questions and discussions, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Some fascinating facts there about integrating our physical well-being with our mental well-being and thinking about how we look after our brains over the life course as much as our physical bodies. So thank you for sharing that with us. Any questions from the audience, please? Yes, lady. Microphones will be brought to you.
Thank you. reading books that you enjoy in early childhood has been shown to have long-lasting benefits. Early childhood, can you give me the ages?
Yeah, actually, you know, the earlier you start, the better. But mostly, if you can do it between sort of 3 to 7, that's good enough.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
We actually looked up to age 9, but it's probably best if you can get it started earlier than that.
There was another gentleman in the middle there, please.
Thank you. And thank you for not saying I got to give the odd drink. I wonder, you talked about the importance of this social interaction, but I think we need to look more at the societal structuring and what is expected of people. I mean, going back to the 1980s and Thatcher's No Such Thing as Society, and German sociologist Ulrich Beck spoke about the way in which now more people are expected to make more decisions, and those decisions are more crucial. The loading on people is incredible, and of course, you know, loading on kids today in terms of what decisions you're going to make, and if you get the wrong one, that's your life gone. So we are making more demands for, you know, cognition. I wonder if there is a societal duty to sort of reduce that cognitive load. And I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're right. We do have major decisions throughout our life that we have to do, and that's one reason why, you know, we focus a lot on executive function and decision making, because some of them are, if you're lucky, you know, you've got 2 positive decisions, but you're still torn, and things like that. But there's also risky decisions where there's a lot of unknown factors, and we still have to make a decision, even though we don't understand all the possible outcomes that could occur from that. So I think you're absolutely right. Executive function is important to develop. Interestingly, our frontal lobes are still in development right up until late adolescence, early young adulthood. So right up until about 24, 25 years of age. And the frontal lobes, as I mentioned, is the area of the brain that's recruited in part in the network when we make these complex decisions. So what is important is that people start from an early age actually developing top-down control over their behaviors and their decision-making possibilities, so that they don't become too impulsive, for instance, and they're able to make good decisions. And I think one thing is possibly to teach about decision making. I mean, how do you go about making good decisions? What are the factors that feed into that when you have to make a decision? Because we are going to be, you know, very knowledge based, as you know. We have to come up with new inventions and things like that. They're always saying to us, you know, the government's always saying we need a solution for this, solution for global warming, solution for, you know, how are we going to reduce the risk of food shortages or something, or something else like, you know, fuel. So there's all these big problems in the world, and it will require good decisions and good knowledge. So cognition is really essential to that. And of course, we do that with the brain. So brain health is essential.
Thank you. Any other questions? There's one down here, please.
Well, I'm pretty loud. I don't need the microphone. Thank you. Cheers. Yeah, thank you. If I may, I might be cheeky and ask you 2 questions. One of them was, I mean, you give plenty of really good advice, but I can think of a common enemy or barrier to many of these things, which is procrastination. So I was wondering if you had any advice on that. And the other was just a quick question on the sleeping hours ideal number, if there's differences between the genders or any specific ages as well. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely for ages. I mean, you know, babies and young people are supposed to sleep a lot longer than adults. So that's why I said, you know, this was middle-aged to older adults that we looked at, and the 7 hours is perfect for that. You know, if you're like an adolescent, it should be 8 to 10 hours, And as you get younger and younger, there's more and more sleep involved, because part of that is the brain development, and it requires that, you know, you obviously use a lot of energy in the brain. So sleep is really important for larger amounts of sleep are important for younger people. So that's that. Procrastination. Yes, everybody likes to procrastinate a little bit, don't they? But I think one thing that's really important is just to, if you're procrastinating, try to figure out why that is. You know, is it that you're lacking in confidence? Is it that you're not feeling that you're going to make the right decision for some reason? And then work on the confidence, because certainly confidence is incredibly important. And I would say that for women, sometimes they do lack confidence, and it's a shame, because, you know, I've trained so many PhD students, both men and women, and they're equally talented, but sometimes the women don't feel as confident as the men. So I think that's really important. But for procrastination, I often think, well, what do I have to do today? That's a, you know, or if there's something that has to be done right away, because often you have a list of things you have to do, don't you? So then you prioritize, and then you decide you're going to get rid of some of them that are reasonable to get off your list, and just say, okay, I'll do it. And once I've done it, the good thing is it won't be there to be done tomorrow. So I think prioritizing is important. Having the confidence to make a decision and stick with it is great. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said they're working with somebody who can't make any decisions, and it's driving them mad, because they sort of have these discussions, and they're waiting for a decision, and it never comes, so that the project's getting delayed and delayed and delayed because this person can't make a decision. So I think it's incredibly important to just have the confidence in your decision-making abilities. Make a list of the pros and cons for different options. That helps a lot. And sometimes it's going with your gut feeling at the end of the day, that, because, you know, we have our cold cognition, which is our planning and that sort of thing. And then we have our sort of hot cognition, which is, this doesn't quite feel right, but this does feel right. And sometimes you have to go with that.
Yes, lady in the middle here, please.
By the way, I love making decisions, because I'd prefer to make them than have somebody else do them.
Whereas I was going to say, I love the notion of incubating an idea and just sitting with it for a while. So I like to incubate my ideas. I don't like to call it procrastination. Yes, please.
Just follows on quite neatly from what you're saying. Just occurred to me that with physical exercise, it's always recommended that you do warm-up exercises beforehand, so you don't strain any muscles. Do you think that the same applies to the brain, that if you did warm-up exercises, you might make better decisions when it comes to it, instead of diving straight into it and perhaps being impulsive?
Certainly, I mean, certainly it's good to have the experience of, I mean, eventually we're going to make a wrong decision. It's impossible to go through life without making a wrong decision at some point. And I think the main thing is to learn from that, and have ability to resilience, but don't let it cripple you in any way and stop you from making decisions in the future. And actually, the decision-making, good and bad, is what we call experience. So, you know, sometimes, you know, in the workforce, slightly older people might not be able to maybe do things as quickly as other people that are younger, but actually they have a lot of experience, so they can avoid problems that maybe somebody else wouldn't be able to who's younger, who hasn't experienced it before. So part of it is just, you know, if you have made a decision that didn't work, just analyze it. You know, why didn't it work? What could I have? Is there anything I could have done to have made it work, or should I have made a different decision altogether? And if so, what would that decision have been? So it's okay to do that, but don't dwell on it, and don't punish yourself with it, and don't, you know, ruminate over it. Just look for the next one and build up that resilience as you go through life. because you will have successful decisions as well. And when you have a really good successful decision, celebrate it, because they're worth celebrating. When you've accomplished something and it's done really well, you should always, savor the moment. Be mindful at that time.
Thank you. There's a lady on the end, and we've got a question from online, have we, Hannah? After this one? Okay.
You showed some graphs around the sleep deprivation and the good sleep and how it's affect the cognition. Any studies in children and young person? Because what's the age group? Because I do see quite a lot of children and young person in my clinics. Years ago, I didn't get that much of referrals for sleep deprivation and a lot of ADHD and ADD referrals. So we do give quite a lot of behavioral strategies and other things, but it would be good to show if there is any scan, like how you show, like how it affects the hippocampus and other regions to visually make them understand, because many of them are very proud in calling themselves as night owls and on a lot of social media and sleep just after 2 o'clock, and that's not good in long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as I said, adolescents need 8 to 10 hours of sleep, and it's very bad for them the next day if they don't get that sleep. And part of it is too much on the computer, too much on the phones, and just before you go to bed. And I would say for adults too, stay away from all that. Don't think about your work just before you're going to bed. Don't get on your phone and start doing stuff just before you go to bed. You should be in a relaxed state, so you shouldn't be dwelling on problems of any sort, or doing that stuff late into the. It's good to keep a routine with your sleep. And as I said, the interesting thing was that study we did on reading for pleasure at an early age showed that they were better at sleeping when they got to adolescence. So I think a lot of people actually read a book when they doze off. They sort of read before bed. And that may be part of it, that it's still good habits, like, we're talking about in Brain Boost, at an early age, and hopefully they'll stay with you throughout life.
And the game wizard that you have shown, has it shown the effects on ADD and ADHD in children and young person?
Yes, they had less attention problems as well. Yeah, so that was remarkable. And they also had less screen time, so they were spending less time on the computers and phones and things like that. Okay. So yeah, it's really good. And it's such an, relatively inexpensive way to boost adolescent happiness and cognition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hannah.
So we have a question from Emma Janssen online. Is it possible that the link between social isolation and dementia is bidirectional, i.e. do early dementia behaviours cause those people to become more socially isolated?
Yeah, that is possible, and it does happen. But in our study, we actually controlled for that by ensuring that people were not close to the range at which, so anybody who was near dementing was not used in that particular study. And so we made sure that it was in one direction only. But you're quite right, it does work in both directions. If you start to have dementia, you're more likely to get socially isolated too. So both things are possible, but in our study we controlled for that, and it was in the direction that the isolation and then the dementia, and then the higher risk of dementia.
Thank you. One right down here, microphone.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It was a brilliant talk. Oh, I work a lot with women in the workplace, and we know that women are have twice the risk of Alzheimer's as men. And I'm wondering, have you looked at whether many of these risk factors, and you've talked a lot about the risk factors and the protective factors, Is there more difficulty for women in engaging with those preventative factors because of increased stress or more sleep deprivation in parenting or any of those sorts of things?
Women do have more to cope with in the workplace in term, and they obviously there's all sorts of factors that, and I won't go into big detail on it, but of course women still live longer, and although the gap has been closing, age is one of the biggest risk factors of all for Alzheimer's disease. So the longer you live, I mean, some people actually think that if you lived essentially forever, you would eventually get Alzheimer's disease. So it's just that you die earlier of something else, and that's why you don't get it. Other people think it's a disease state. So there's still a debate about that, because in the healthy brain, if you're older, you do have plaques and tangles. It's the same neuropathology. It's just that the quantity is so much greater in people who have Alzheimer's disease. So it could be that, that's part of it, is obviously that women are living longer than men.
Thank you.
It used to be, before statins, many men died of heart attacks and things like that, cardiovascular risks and whatnot. So that was even a bigger gap then. But
thank you. Have we got time for one more question? Sorry, back up the steps. Getting her steps in tonight, literally.
Getting her exercise.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
As someone who quite likes coffee, the caffeine study was slightly sad. How many coffees would you say is too many per day?
Well,
Per hour or per day?
Day.
Just what I would say is try to cut down and try to do it slowly, and then you'll everybody, or not everybody, but some people are just tea drinkers who can't tolerate coffee, caffeine. But it's better if you can just stick with the one in the morning and not have a lot through the day. So I don't want to put a number on it per se, but it's better just to have the one in the morning and not any more throughout the day, if you can do that.
One's okay.
Gosh, you did ask for that one. Thank you. I've got one final question for you, Barbara. Is it true that the brain is still one of the organs we know least about in the body?
Yeah, it's remarkable, because obviously we all have brains, and we all should know more about it, but it's just so complicated. And the more we learn about the brain, the more complicated it gets, because there's so many different levels that we can talk about. Like we've been talking mainly today about cognition and well-being, your emotions and how you feel and that sort of thing. But you can go down to a cellular or molecular level. And so we talked about learning and memory, but how exactly is that memory stored in the brain? So we know it happens, we found out it happens, we consolidate our memories during sleep, but what actually goes on when that's happening? And that's really a big question that a lot of people are currently engaged in trying to understand. How does a memory form? And so there's so much about the brain that we still need to know. But it's just wonderful. So yeah, it's a new horizon.
Thank you so much. Well, if you could thank Barbara with me for a very stimulating and engaging lecture, please. And if you want to hear more about Barbara's work, she's speaking at the Cambridge Literary Festival in April. And just to remind you, we have now got refreshments, and Barbara and Crystal's book is available. And I believe if you ask very, very nicely, she might also sign the book for you. But obviously we don't want her there all night. So be mindful, please, of Barbara's time. Thank you for your lovely questions. Thank you, Barbara, for being so engaging. And go and boost your brains, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fun.